So I failed to mention last week, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. This is co-written by Norm Geisler and Frank Turek. This is the book upon which this class is patterned. It's written at a popular level. Pastor Joel got it, really liked it. He may already be done with it. It's an easy read, and it's written to put the cookies on the lower shelf, so to speak. There's another one written by William Lane Craig called Reasonable Faith. It's going to be a little bit more philosophical, going to be a little bit less accessible, but it'll be more exacting than this one, as you might suspect. So this is going to give you a lot of the tools if you want to be reading behind the scenes, and you'll see me saying a lot of the same stuff as this book. So this is I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, Norm Geisler, Frank Turek. After you've read this one and you know the substance of what this says, I would next recommend Unsilenced by James Bocardo, Unsilenced, How to Voice the Gospel. Because remember last week we were talking about the 3 obstacles that people have to the gospel. One of them can be intellectual. Most people, the majority of people I've ran into, I went out and did this field experience in Marion Square where I part of my degree program, and I was just specifically seeking people from College of Charleston who would have these intellectual obstacles, and they were hard to find. Most people, even at that level, have emotional or volitional obstacles to the faith. Remember, those are they don't want to bend their will, and they don't want, or they have some emotional hurt that's stopped them. This book helps you sort through, gives you a game plan, a tactical game plan for how to sort through and find which one of these people need an intellectual argument, and it helps you quickly answer. So what you'll find is a lot of people will purport to have an intellectual argument. They'll say, what about the people in Africa? But they don't really care about the people in Africa. They're just throwing that out to sidetrack you. So this book kind of gives you a game plan to how to deal with those questions and find out whether they really have a question about the people in Africa and you need to spend some time, or how to just move through those types of discussions. So this will give you a on-the-ground type approach. There's another one that's a little bit, again, the next level up would be Greg Koukl's Tactics, How to Share Your Faith. And that's a good book for how to ask questions and maneuver in conversations. All right, and for those just entering, I think there's notes over there on the corner if you want some. And I tried to print some of the more salient details this time so you wouldn't have to handwrite them. I am posting all of these lectures on YouTube, lectures, classes. The slides and the outlines are available. So if you want to go back and look through some of the slides and see, you can click in the description of that video and get those if you're so inclined. All right, so last week we did an introduction to why we do apologetics, what it is, why we do it. There were 4 reasons and some objections to it. This week we're going to start down the task of showing that Christianity is true. And these are the 12 steps that are outlined in I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And today we're going to be tackling the first 2. Truth about reality is knowable, and the opposite of truth is false. Fairly straightforward, but in our society these first 2 points need to be added to it. In fact, for a long time there was the 10-point to show Christianity was true, and Norm and Frank Turek realized they had to add these first 2 points as society has grown more and more modern and postmodern. Okay. So the outline, we're going to go over truth, what it ain't. Truth, can it be known? Truth, what is it? I changed my battery, but apparently it's still not responding. And is it absolute? And objections. All right, truth, what it ain't. So unless you're from the South, this may not make sense to you. So, truth, what it is not. But I just write it in how I think. So there are several different ideas about what truth is out there. And so we're just going to hit these real quick and go past them. But truth is not just what works. It's not just if it's pragmatic and it works, that's what's true. Because sometimes lies can work. There's examples from science where they thought they understood stuff and then that paradigm was overturned. But we still use Newtonian physics today to get someone to the moon, even though we're all pretty convinced that Einstein's relativity, which is a different paradigm, is actually true. Truth isn't what makes us feel good. Bad news can be true. Truth is not what the majority says, because 51% of us could be wrong. Truth is not what is coherent and understandable. So, not that truth shouldn't be coherent and understandable, but just because it's coherent and understandable doesn't qualify it to be truth. That's the difference. Because you could these are just some quick counterexamples. A conspiracy can all agree to a coherent and understandable set of facts, but the conspiracy would still be a lie. Truth is not what was intended. A good intention can be wrong. Truth is not what is comprehensive. A long, detailed presentation can arrive at a wrong conclusion. So there's a phrase out there one philosopher said that made famous was, the precision is not the truth. I won't try to give you the foreign pronunciation of that. Truth is not just about how we know. Because there could be truths that are unknown that we just haven't discovered yet. So even though we may debate how we come to know a truth, that doesn't weigh into whether it's true or not. Most of us probably had Christian parents. Even if you didn't, you grew up in a Christian nation. That doesn't mean you just believe Christianity because you're in a Christian nation. That's the genetic fallacy. So it's not just how we come to know the truth that makes it true or not. It's that what is actually true. Truth is not what is simply believed. A lie is still, you can believe a lie and it still could be false. And finally, truth is not what is publicly proved. The truth can be privately known like a buried treasure. So just because it's not in the open forum of the public doesn't disqualify it from being truth. So you may be wondering why all these things are up there, because this kind of may seem nonsensical if you haven't trafficked in here. So the question is, can we even know truth? And the reason we ask is because there were some philosophers a couple hundred years ago that really started asking those questions and led us off track. I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that the Earth goes around the sun. Well, that wasn't always a known and settled on fact. And when we had the Copernican revolution, where science and everyone started to kind of recognize, yes, sun's in the center of the solar system, not the Earth, people threw the baby out with the bathwater. They threw out Aristotelian metaphysics. Those are the metaphysics of Aristotle. Pardon me, strike that. They threw out Aristotelian physics, which describes how things move. You know, Aristotle had all of these things that he thought described how nature really was, but it was wrong. But when they threw out his physics, they also threw out his metaphysics and how we come to know things, his philosophy. And Aristotle, even though that may not be a name that you're familiar with in Christian circles, his metaphysics and his epistemology, those are just big words to say metaphysics is what's beyond the physical. That's what metaphysics means. And epistemology comes from the Greek word to know and the study of. So the study of how we know stuff. So we had all these philosophers come onto the scene that started asking these questions about how we could actually know. And they confused a lot of stuff. And so we're living with the aftershocks of those philosophers today. And we're going to go over briefly what they are, who they are. these are we're going to talk, and they're printed in your notes, I believe. These things are all kind of interrelated. So I wouldn't say that there is skepticism here and relativism here, because they're not like distinct countries, but they're all kind of an organic, interrelated thing. So skepticism doubts all truth. Agnosticism says you can't know anything. There's two versions of agnosticism. One says I just don't know anything, and there's one that says I don't know anything and you can't know anything. That's the one we're talking about, the stronger version. Modernism affirms only the empirical and analytical truth, and we'll talk about those, but real quick, empirical is something I can measure with my five senses. So if I can take speed, mass, velocity, energy, those are types of empirical things. If I count the number of fish with a certain design or something, those would be empirical in biological sense. Analytical truths are truths that I can come up with without even interacting with reality. A triangle has 180 degrees. Those things I can prove mathematically. So if it's not empirical, something I can measure, or something that I can know from thought alone, then we can't even say anything about it, according to modernism. So this would take all of spiritual truth, all of metaphysical truth, what is actual reality, would be taken away by modernism. Post-Modernism takes it a step further and says there is no truth. Not even in those other disciplines like the sciences and maths can there be truth. So we're going to look at these a little more. Relativism says there's no absolute truth. What could be true for you might not necessarily be true for me. So these are some of the big players in this. This is David Hume. This is John Locke and Immanuel Kant up on the screen. So skepticism says we should doubt everything about reality. We can know only sense data. So this was the, we're not going to dive into a history of philosophy, but there was this divide in philosophy between the rationalists who said what we know comes from our mind, and the empiricists who say what we know comes from the earth, from our senses. And really what's true is those things are tied together. Our senses see something and our minds work together with that, because we're a complete person. But that's just that's a wave top. We could spend a whole semester on that. We should suspend judgment on all truth claims about reality. So that's skepticism. Basically, they said we don't know if we really know what we think we know. You follow that? This is, we're going to talk about it, but this is a self-defeating truth claim. Because they are making a truth claim about how reality is, because they're saying the reality of the situation is we cannot know reality. So when you phrase it that way, it makes it clear. Or it could be just a begging the question by claiming that doubt is the only thing that should not be doubted. So the question is, are they skeptical of their skepticism? Agnosticism, truth about reality is unknowable. Kant said we can't know truth about reality. We can only know appearance but not reality. So Kant was really trying to, John Locke and David Hume really did a lot to mess things up for philosophers and scientists, because they put a lot of stuff out there that made people believe that we just couldn't know reality. Kant's trying to reconcile it, and he's saying it's no big deal. We may never know what reality is, but as our sense data comes in, we are impinging on that sense data, and we're forming the reality, and it's always the same, so it's a useful fiction for us. Whether we ever know what reality is, it's fine. So that's what he's saying. We can't really know it, but that's okay. We can still do science because it's uniform to us, because even though I have rose-colored glasses, I always have those rose-colored glasses, and so it's fine. We can't know the thing in itself, only the thing to us, and we must remain agnostic about reality. So the retort is, Kant, if you can't really know reality, then how did you know that this is true? Modernism, we live in a society predominantly ruled by modernism. Even though you'll hear a lot of people say we're in a postmodern society, really it's modernistic. And this is David Hume, and here's where we're going to talk about the either things we can measure or things we can know. And this is a quote from one of his books. He says, if we take in our hand any volume of divinity or school metaphysics, for instance, let us ask, does it contain any abstract reasoning concerning quantity or number? Those analytical things like how many degrees are in a triangle. No. Does it contain any experimental reasoning concerning matter of fact and existence? No. Commit it then to the flames, for it can contain nothing but sophistry and illusion. Now, the question that we're going to ask to this is, does his statement right here, is it something that you can know with precision like mathematics?
But do we know mathematics?
Yeah, we do. Mathematicians know mathematics with precision, let me say that. Things like geometry, side angle side, those types of things that we can know without having to actually measure stuff, because we can prove it logically. But I'm asking, does this statement live in that domain of data? His very statement. Is this something you can prove with geometry? The truthfulness of his statement? No. Can I go out and measure something and prove this statement that he made? So his statement doesn't live up to its own requirements, because his preponderance of what is true, it's only true if it's empirical or analytical. That statement itself is neither empirical or analytical, so it's a self-refuting claim. So that's modernism. Postmodernism takes it a step further. Says we must deconstruct all truth claims. We can reconstruct as many views as possible. No reconstruction is objectively true, it's just merely new. So this says any truth claim you want to make, we don't really know anything about it. Postmodernism. Let me read you a quick story by Ravi Zacharias. He says, I remember lecturing at Ohio State University, one of the largest universities in this country. I was minutes away from beginning my lecture, and my host was driving me past a new building called the Wexner Center for the Performing Arts. He said, this is America's first postmodern building, and this is it right here. I was startled for a moment, and I said, what is a postmodern building? He said, well, the architect said that he designed this building with no design in mind. When the architect was asked why, he said, if life is capricious, why should our buildings have any design in any meaning? So he has pillars that have no purpose. He has stairways that go nowhere. He has a senseless building built, and somebody has paid for it. And this was Ravi's reply. I said, so his argument was that if life has no purpose in design, why should the building have any design? He said, that is correct. I said, did he do the same thing with the foundation? All of a sudden there was silence. You see, you and I can fool with infrastructure as much as we would like, but we dare not fool with the foundation because it would call our bluff in a hurry. So this is kind of just shows on a practical level the self-refuting nature of postmodernism. Relativism, all truth is relative. Reality has no unchanging forms. All truth is in a process and it never is final. All truth is changing and relative. And here's a quote from this guy, Alfred North Whitehead. There are no whole truths. All truths are half-truths. It is trying to treat them as whole truths that plays the devil. So this is a proponent of relativism and process theory. Relative truth is something that's true only for some people in some places at some times. But we're saying that's truth according to them. So this is a scene of Christ's trial, and if you remember, even Pontius Pilate, when Christ says, for one reason I came, for one reason I was born, to testify to the truth, and Pontius Pilate says, what is truth? Who can know truth? So this is, Pontius Pilate was 2,000 years ahead of his time, because all those philosophers we just talked about are saying the same thing. We've covered some of this, but relativism is self-refuting. So these are all statements that relativism, skepticism, what we just covered, would make. And if you really look at them, they don't live up to their own standard. Truth is not telling it like it is. There is no absolute truth. Is that statement absolutely true? We should doubt everything. Should we doubt that statement? We can't know the truth about reality. Then how do you know that we know that? If we couldn't know that, then you could never make that statement. True for you, but not for me. Is this statement true for you, but not for me? Is it true for me, but not for you? True statements must either be analytical or empirically verifiable. This is what I was talking about with David Hume, and where he said it either has to be scientific or analytic. But this statement itself is neither empirical nor analytic. It doesn't live up to its own requirement. We must deconstruct all truths. Should we deconstruct this truth? See what I'm saying, why it's self-refuting? Truth is always changing. Is that truth always changing? So a self-defeating argument is like aiming at something, but you hit yourself. Here's C.S. Lewis coming in to make a quote for us. You can argue with a man who says rice is unwholesome, but you neither can nor need argue with a man who says rice is unwholesome, but I'm not saying that this is true. I feel that this surrender of the claim to truth has all the air of an expedient adopted at the last moment. If they do not claim to know any truths, ought they not to have warned us rather earlier of this fact? For really, from all the books they have written, one would have got the idea that they were claiming to give a true account of things. The fact surely is that they nearly always are claiming to do so. The claim is surrendered only when the question is discussed and then it's pressed, and when the crisis is over, the claim is tacitly resumed. And this is what he's getting at. They are claiming to tell us how reality is by telling us we cannot know how reality is. It's self-refuting. So what is the truth? If we ignore it, we might get injured by it. The truth expressed moves on. We can put our head in the sand, but it doesn't always have good outcomes. So now we talked about what it's not. We talked about why we have to talk about what it's not. So what is it? Truth is simply telling it like it is. Truth corresponds to the facts. Truth matches its object. Here's an example. This object, which is faint on the projector, is a table. That's true. It's when truth corresponds to reality, then we have truth. Truth can be discovered. We don't always know what the truth is. Just because we don't know what the truth is doesn't mean that it wasn't always there. Truth is discovered but does not change over time. When more exact truth is discovered, it has still always existed. For example, we know that the earth now revolves around the sun. We have a better paradigm for how things actually are. It doesn't mean that before we knew that truth was not there, it's just we didn't know it. This is all getting confusing. Aristotle will help clear it up for us. He says, to say of what is that it is not, or of what is not that it is, that is false. While to say of what is that it is, and of what is not, that is true. If you've gone to the National Apologetics conference up in Charlotte and heard Richard Howell, he's one of the teachers up there that I've had. He has this embroidered and on his wall in his living room. This is the correspondence theory of truth, and all he's saying is, if it matches reality, then it's true. If it doesn't match reality, then it's false. Very simple notion of what truth is. So, truth is what corresponds to reality. The correspondence view of truth cannot be denied without using it, since those who deny it assume their view corresponds with reality. That's what we've been talking about. In reality, everyone holds to a correspondence view of truth. Those who deny it in theory use it in fact. So all we're saying is, when we have a theory of truth and something is true, we're saying that statement or that paradigm corresponds to what is actually real. The Bible assumes and uses the correspondence view of reality. It's implied in the 9th commandment, you shouldn't lie. Don't misrepresent the facts of what reality actually is. It's entailed in Acts 24 when it says you can learn the truth when you verify the facts. It's manifested in Genesis 42:16 when Joseph said they should look at the facts so that your words may be tested to see if you are telling the truth. It was employed in the test for a false prophet. Remember, prophet says something and it's not true, doesn't correspond with reality. That guy was to lose his life. To say I'm speaking for the Lord and then have it go wrong was a bad thing. So that's what truth is. Very simply, truth is what corresponds to reality. Is truth absolute? Is truth absolute? Well, we take truth to be absolute in safety. We don't want a hard hat that's relatively good, right? You want a hard hat that will work. We take it to be given in money. Who was that? Bernie Madoff, when he fooled all those people. He was relatively investing their money, right, in his own pocket. We expect our investments and our banks to be objectively true. We don't want it to be relatively true. We want what it should be to actually correspond to what it is in reality. Same with medicine. We accidentally gave him too much medicine, but we're relatively close. We expect all these things. In relationships, I was relatively faithful. We don't expect that, right? In court proceedings, we want the court to actually find out what reality is. If the guy was guilty, we want the court to find him guilty. If he was innocent, we want him to find him innocent. This is a common everyday notion of what truth is. Everyone really believes in absolute truth in these areas. Why shouldn't we believe it in things that we can't see, even though it may be harder to show? So over and against relative truth is absolute truth. Absolute truth is something true for all people, in all places, at all times. And if it's true, then it's absolutely true. And if it's not true, then it's not absolutely true. We got to understand what we mean by those, so let's walk through some objections, and I think it'll be clear. So objections to the absolute truth. Truth changes. What is true today may be false tomorrow. The progress of science is proof that truth is constantly changing. We've kind of prepared you for this. The truth doesn't change. The earth was always round. Those who believed it was flat were in error, not in truth. So the truth was there, people just didn't know it. Belief in absolute truth is a narrow view. Yeah. Truth is by its very nature narrow. There can only be one set of things that are true. I'm here and not anywhere else. That's narrow. This is right here. 4 + 4 = 8, and only 8. And all truths are like this. These are narrow, but they are true.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, just to think of what someone who's objecting would say. So, if we're saying that truth doesn't change, maybe we discover something that we were previously wrong about, we realize we were wrong. What would you say if someone says, well, how do you know you're still not wrong? Maybe truth doesn't change, they'll accept that, but they'll say, well, you could still be wrong and just haven't discovered the real truth yet, and we're just, maybe the earth is actually cube or something, and we don't know it yet.
Yeah.
What would you do to that argument?
I'd say sure. I'd say, just because if someone said, well, Aristotle had his view of how things worked in the world, physics. He thought that the heavier the object, the more the faster it would fall. We know that's false. Negating air resistance, things fall at the same rate. Newton came along and he gave us some laws, force equals mass times acceleration, all those other stuff. And those were very, very accurate. And they helped describe the world very, very well. But in general, scientific laws aren't written anywhere we can find them. They are just descriptions of regular occurrences. And so Einstein comes along and he has some theories, and it ousts Newton. Okay, relativity, Einstein's relativity, is proved with a whole lot of precision, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't find something that doesn't fit into his paradigm, and then we learn more about the universe. That doesn't go against absolute truth. It just says that we're finite beings and we're trying to make sense of our world, and we know something, and what we know can get better, and we can look back and say, oh, that was false back then. That doesn't mean that there isn't an absolute truth out there to be known. Does that make sense?
Before I went in any direction, I'd just ask him to give me an example. And then I'd know if I needed to go science or, well, I think, well, what if I kill your 5-year-old child? Is that right? Wrong? I mean, I don't know. There's so many. It just depends where he's coming from. I'd find out.
All right. No one can have an absolute understanding of the truth. Truth can be absolute without having us having absolute understanding of it. Something can be absolutely true without our having absolute evidence for it. So I can believe something is true on fairly good reasons, and it could in fact be true even if I can't prove it to a skeptic. There are examples of relative truths, but alleged examples of relative truths will always fail when you look at them more closely. Whatever is true is actually true for everyone, everywhere, for all times. So here's a common type example that people would use to try to show relativism. A person walks into a room, like maybe this morning. I was hot this morning when I came in here, and asked 3 people, is it cold in here? First person says, yes, it's cold. Next person says, no, it feels fine. Third person says, oh no, it's hot in here. So here's relative. The truth about the room is relative, is what someone might want to say. Is this proof, though? No, because there is an absolute truth for everyone, everywhere, at all times in this. It's just disguised. So what is it? The right answer is, what's the temperature of the room? Right question. It's 70 degrees. Well, to me it feels cold. To me it feels okay. To me it feels hot. It's absolutely true for every people, for everyone, everywhere at all times that it is 70 degrees in that room. And above and beyond that, it's absolutely true for everyone at all times, everywhere, that this guy feels cold. He does really indeed feel cold. That's true. He does really feel good, and this last guy really does feel hot. Those are absolute truths that are true for all times. Just because they have different experiences doesn't negate the idea of absolute truths. And any proposed example of a relative truth, once you get down to defined terms, there's absolute truths underneath it. So, true conclusions about truth. Beliefs cannot change a fact, no matter how sincerely they're held. I can sincerely believe the world is flat, but that only makes me sincerely wrong. Truth is transcultural. 3 + 3 is 6, here, there, everywhere. It doesn't matter where you are. So truth transcends culture. Being raised in a culture doesn't make a belief true or false. Someone will say, well, you're just a Christian because you grew up in America. If you grew up over in Iraq, you'd be Muslim. Well, maybe that's true, but that doesn't tell you whether Islam or Christianity is true. You got to look at the reasons behind them. So just because a culture says something doesn't make that thing true, doesn't make it false. We got to look at the reasons and the evidence behind those claims. One's attitude doesn't change the truth. Loving relationships do not change the truth. Contrary beliefs are possible, but contrary truths are not possible. Even though Jay and I may disagree on something, that's fine. We disagree. We hold different beliefs, but there's only one truth. One of us is wrong, or both of us, in fact, could be wrong. You can believe everything is true, but everything can't be true. Objective truth cannot be denied. You ever see those shows? It's not very often I see this, but a paradigm back when I was growing up, it would be all these foreign dignitaries coming to America and committing some crime and then claiming immunity. You know, oh, I have diplomatic immunity. I don't know. So that's what was in my mind when I wrote this. Truth's immunity. Truth is immune to certain things. It can't be touched by these. So this is kind of a restatement of that last slide. Truth is immune to sincerity. It's immune to your culture. It's immune to your attitudes about it, relationships, beliefs, and desires. Those things don't affect the truth claim. What affects the truth claim is reality. Does it correspond to reality? So a summary of what truth is. Truth is what corresponds to the facts. Truth can be known. And as we discover more, we may say, oh, we were close, but we weren't exactly right. We think we're closer now. And I think that's what happens in science all the time. What is true for everyone, everywhere, and all time. So what's the implication to us when we want to share our faith with somebody? If we can establish that Christianity is true, then other religions where they disagree with Christianity are false. Now there are some agreements between Christianity and other religions. Lots of religions talk about loving. Okay, they got something right. But where they disagree with Christianity, then we're going to say that they're wrong, because they can't both be true, can't both be opposed to each other and both be true. So that's where we're going to talk about the law of non-contradiction. So what is falsity? What is falsehoods? What are things that aren't true? False is what does not tell it like it is. What does not correspond to the facts. What does not match its object. And these are all the things we said about what truth is. So if it's not these, then it's not truth, and that means it's false. So the law of non-contradiction says that truth by definition excludes all opposites. Truth by definition is narrow. 2 plus 2 only equals 4. Here's what I want to get to. The logical law of non-contradiction says that something cannot both be A and not A at the same time in the same sense. So we could say that shrimp is jumbo. You're going to use an oxymoron. And we could say this elephant is jumbo. Those things, those things might be able to look like they are counterexamples of the law of non-contradiction. Because you could say that shrimp's jumbo, no, that shrimp is small. But you're equivocating on words. It's big for a shrimp, but a shrimp is still a small creature. So once we know and have A well defined, either it's, if we have a certain set of what we mean by A, in this case jumbo, then we would know whether the shrimp is actually jumbo or not jumbo. I don't know if that's the best example. Another good example that's near and dear to my heart is balding. Balding.
Sorry.
Either you are balding or you're not balding, and once we define what we exactly mean by balding, then you can't be in both categories, and that's all that the law of non-contradiction is saying. So either the earth is round or it's flat, it can't be both. It is undeniable as it cannot be denied without being affirmed. We can't deny the law of contradiction without actually affirming it. It's just like truth. The one who claims contradictions can both be true does not believe that the contradiction of this statement is also true. Does that make sense? The one who says opposites can both be true does not believe that the opposite of that statement could also be true. Here's a Muslim philosopher from medieval times. We got a lot from them, but even though they got their religion wrong, they got a lot of their philosophy right. He says, anyone who denies the law of non-contradiction should be beaten and burned until he admits that to be beaten is not the same as to not be beaten, and to be burned is not the same as to not be burned. So maybe there's a little bit of a violence in there, but he's saying there's a difference between being beaten and not being beaten, and we can prove that. The law of non-contradiction. Some people will walk out the elephant and the 6 blind men They all feel a different part of the elephant, and they think, oh, it's a spear, it's a snake, it's a rope, it's a tree, it's a wall, depending on which side. And guess what? They're all wrong. The moral of this story is that it's an elephant. And the person with the right perspective will know what actually corresponds to reality. It's not any of those things. And it's not, they're all getting little bits of the truth. They're all getting it wrong. So if this comes out, in a conversation, I would say, yeah, and they're all wrong. Summary. Truth is knowable and absolute. Truth is what corresponds to reality. Anything that is not true is by definition false by the law of non-contradiction. Any argument that tries to deny the absolute knowable truth or the law of non-contradiction is self-refuting. Because in order to try to refute that truth is knowable, you have to know truth. In order to try to refute that truth is absolute, then you have to use an absolute truth to refute that. In order to try to refute the law of non-contradiction, you will in fact implicitly be using the law of non-contradiction. So all of these fail. So I know that may have been fast. Hopefully we'll get to camp a little on next week. So next week, is it true that the theistic God exists? So next week and the following, we're going to be camping on some arguments for the truth of God's existence, and maybe it'll slow down a little bit. So that is it. Danny, would you lead us in a word of prayer?
Father, I thank you for this opportunity we've had to sit down around the subject of apologetics, Lord. I thank you for those who spent years in time studying truth and studying your word and studying history so that we can be better prepared to defend our faith. And I pray that you would strengthen us. I pray that you would give us wisdom and understanding of the word and these facts so that we can use it to defend our faith and to present what is true about Jesus Christ and about salvation. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thanks.